Joining us now, Corey Stewart, chairman of the Prince William Board of Supervisors, now a blue county, but he keeps winning. Also ran for lieutenant governor in 2013. Now we're not going to talk about that, came in third, but ran for governor in 2017, edged out by Ed Gillespie. Looking back at this, probably would have done better than Ed. We would have got the Trump voters out, no question about that. But he is now a announced candidate for U.S. Senate, the only announced candidate. A lot of rumblings out there, E.W. Jackson, or let's see, Nick Freitas, House of Delegates member. But nobody's announced, just Corey Stewart. So right now he's alone at the top of the heap trying to take on Tim Kaine. Corey Stewart, happy Thanksgiving to you, your lovely wife Maria, and your family.
Yeah, you too, John. Great to be on the show this morning.
Now, Corey Stewart sends out the best press releases in press release history. So I got to read this release he sends out last week. It's the best presser ever. Okay, do you mind if I read it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so what Republican senatorial candidate Corey Stewart today, this is about a week ago, called on Tim Kaine and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to immediately expel Al Franken from the U.S. Senate. Quote, given Al Franken's admission of guilt in the matter of a sexual abuse of Leanne Tweeden and the existence of photographic evidence of Al Franken's abuse, that infamous picture on the plane, Senator Tim Kaine and Mitch McConnell should move to immediately expel Senator Franken from the U.S. Senate, Stewart said. And then he goes on to say Tim Kaine called on Roy Moore to step aside for unproven 40-year-old allegations or be defeated, Stewart said, yet Kaine remains silent on Al Franken. Then he goes on to say, Tim Kaine is applying a disgusting double standard for defending Al Franken, an admitted sexual predator, and Virginians will not stand for it. And finally, he says, if they won't expel Al Franken, they'll be sending a loud message to the nation that the D.C. establishment will defend their moneyed special interests before they'll defend victims of sexual assault perpetrated by their frat brothers in Congress. And the kicker in this whole thing is he said, basically, the American taxpayers are sick and tired of these representatives literally going to D.C. and end up doing nothing but playing grab ass at taxpayer expense. He has sailed. So that's a pretty good press release, Corey. Setting him up there to play grab ass at taxpayers' expense. That's pretty good. That one, that's a classic. I actually printed that out and hung it up in my office. And every day I look at it, I laugh because it's funny as hell. Send him up there to play grab ass. So, I mean, come on, man. Al Franken, I mean, they got pictures of him, but he said he's sorry. I mean, isn't sorry all right? He said he was sorry.
Well, look, the problem is the double standard. The problem is that, we're the Democrats, not just the Democrats, but like I mentioned there, Mitch McConnell and the establishment Republicans in Washington who don't want Judge Moore are trying to hold him accountable for something he allegedly did 38 years ago. And there's no evidence of it. There's no substantiation of it. And they're just presuming that he's guilty, and instead of presuming that he's innocent. And then, but when it comes to one of their buddies up there, when it comes to an establishment Democrat like Al Franken, then it's a totally different standard, and they're prepared to look the other way when it comes to Al Franken. And you've got pictures of this guy doing it. He's admitted to it. It wasn't 38 years ago; it was 10 years ago. And yet Al Franken's not being expelled from the Senate, but yet they're threatening to expel Roy Moore for something he supposedly did 38 years ago. And that's the big difference here, and that's why we have to stand up and fight.
So talk about Roy Moore. I mean, if you were in Alabama, would you back Moore? Would you support Moore?
Absolutely. I do now. I've come out very strongly in support of Judge Moore. Like the president said the other day, I mean, the last thing that America needs is a liberal U.S. senator from Alabama. I mean, this is going to be a permanent thing, or something that's, this guy's going to be here for a long, long time. We're not going to be able to pass the president's agenda with a Democrat from Alabama. We will be able to do it with Judge Moore, even if, some people may look at the allegations from 38 years ago and say, well, I think he's guilty. I think he did that. But that misses the point. The point is, do you want to pass the president's agenda or not? And is somebody presumed innocent or presumed guilty in our country?
Well, what about the fact the alleged pedophilia with an underage girl, 14, even though it was 38 years ago? I mean, the fact that he dated 16-year-olds is creepy, right? But it's not illegal. But when you're with somebody underage, that's pretty bad. I mean, don't you think that should disqualify him if it's true?
Well, if it's true, absolutely it should. But how do you, the thing is, it hasn't been proven true. And it's not up to Judge Moore to prove that he's innocent for something that somebody accused him of 38 years ago. It's up to his accusers to prove that he's guilty, not the other way around. That's why you have a statute of limitations. That's why you have a statute of limitations in the United States. You can't, you wait 38 years, to level allegations against somebody.
Mm-hmm. All right, so look, he has denied them, right? So certainly the one allegation, Corey Stewart, alleging sexual assault in the parking lot in the car with the yearbook signature, some of those facts have come into question. I'm not denying that the woman is credible or not telling the truth, the one that went to New York with Gloria Allred, but if you look at the proof of the yearbook, that really seems suspect to me. The signatures don't match. The ink doesn't match. The timeline makes no sense. He signed his name as DA. He was not DA. He was assistant DA. There's no evidence that he signed anything DA except for that. Somebody else had the initials DA. The book came out and it was signed in December. It didn't come out till May. I mean, there's a lot of things. And then the woman also, some of the facts of the assault in the car, where the dumpster was, what the lighting was, those were not consistent. Doesn't mean that she's lying, but, we do have a process that says you're innocent until proven otherwise. It seems in Judge Roy Moore's case, the media has already been convicted him, right?
Yeah, I think that's right, and and Alabamans can look through that. They're going to see this for what it is. It's an attempt by the establishment, by the Washington establishment, by the swamp, to try to unseat or try to dissuade Alabamans from supporting a pro-Trump candidate like Judge Moore, somebody who's going to support the president's agenda. That's the last thing that Mitch McConnell and the Democrats want up in Washington. So they're seeing through it. And for all of your listeners out there, just put yourself in that position. Imagine if you're a guy, or if you're a woman. Imagine that somebody accuses your son or your husband, or your father or some other loved one, many years later. And then instead of saying that they have to prove that that you're guilty, that it's up to you to prove that you're innocent. 38 years later, mm-hmm. It's an impossible standard. It's an impossible standard, and that's why even if you look at Judge Moore and you say, I don't like the guy, or I think maybe he is guilty of these things, but that really isn't the point. The point is that we've got to presume the two things. One, you got to presume people are innocent until proven guilty. It's up to the accuser to prove guilt, not up to the accused to prove innocence. And number two, there's an obvious attempt here by the establishment to keep Trump supporters out of Washington. That's what's going on.
You know what? I think there's a lot of truth to that statement. Let's get to the Senate version of the tax cut bill. If you were in the U.S. Senate right now, Corey Stewart, would you be in favor of it or not, and why?
It's imperfect, but yes, I would support it. We have to get tax cuts through. It's not. Look, I've looked at this thing from my own perspective and what it's going to do to my taxes. I think they're probably going to go up a little bit, but you have to look at it from what's good for the country. And there's no question that that lowering the corporate income tax rate in the United States, it must be done. It will result in hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, and repatriated money that's going to come into the United States, that's going to generate jobs, is going to provide for a lot of economic growth, not just now, but for decades to come. And as that happens, employment will bloom. You're going to get a lot more jobs, a lot more high-end manufacturing jobs. You're going to get not just service jobs, and the economy is going to thrive. And that will mean that in 2018, and because businesses will immediately start reacting, by the way, even though the new tax law won't be implemented, until months from now. The fact is that businesses will begin to repatriate their money and begin to invest in the United States now in anticipation of what's going to happen. That's good for the whole country. And by the way, it's good for President Trump. It's good for the Republicans in 2018. It'll be good for President Trump in 2020.
Now, congressional leaders are eyeing a deal to raise budgetary caps by as much as $200 billion over 2 years in order to avoid a government shutdown. The president has also said, why do we even have these caps? If you were in the Senate right now, is that something that you would entertain?
I'm not going to shut down the country. I'll be supporting the president's agenda. If the president says, "Look, let's not worry about these artificial caps. What we have to do is thinking about, how we're going to reduce spending, out of control entitlements, how we're going to, contain the costs of, for example, Medicaid. It's a big one." Then that's what we ought to be focusing in on. I think these artificial battles over the caps they're not doing us any good. We need to. I think the president is right. There's really there's no reason why Congress has to even do that in the first place.
Well, but then without it, they just keep raising the debt in perpetuity, because the other argument is they're doing it anyway. So what's the difference, right? It's not like it stopped them.
Well, I think, but to go back to what the president said, and I think what your question is that, well, look, at the end of the day, we've got to make some hard decisions. I'm going to go up to Washington not to take the easy decisions. I'm not going to go to Washington just to score political points and say that I voted for something even though it didn't pass, et cetera. I'm not going to do that. What we've got to do is we've got to focus on controlling the cost of entitlements, out of control spending, and make some real cuts. That it's going to mean reform to first and foremost, it's going to mean reform to Medicaid.
Well, that's a long way off to able to reform that. And of course, the president has said that in the first part of his term, he doesn't want to tackle any of the entitlements. But the Trump administration, Corey Stewart, has also said that they want to get rid of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, which, as you know, allows undocumented immigrants brought into the country as children to work and go to school without the fear of deportation. The DACA deadline is coming soon. There's going to be a battle over it. If you were in the Senate, what would be your position on it? And is it something that you would shut the government down over?
Yeah, I think, look, yes, I would absolutely end DACA. No question about it. It's, the whole problem with the immigration system in the United States is if you don't enforce the law, then you have no law. You've got chaos, and that's what we've got. We've got chaos inside of our immigration system in the United States. It doesn't even matter what we're doing with regard to illegal immigration, because we have so much illegal immigration that flies completely under the radar. Congress isn't doing anything about it. The first step is that you've got to end DACA. You've got to build a wall. And you've got to implement internal enforcement of the nation's immigration laws, and that means checking immigration status of every single person who was arrested for any crime, any place in the country. It's what we do in Prince William County, by the way. It's the only locality in the state that does it. It brings down crime. It focuses on the criminal illegal aliens. I'd be supporting the president there, and actually I'd be leading on this issue very strongly.
There's two other candidates that are telling me they're going to enter the race for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate. Former Lieutenant Governor candidate, 2013, E.W. Jackson, Bishop Jackson, and House of Delegates member Nick Freitas. Corey, both of these telling me that they're likely to enter the race within the next 2 weeks. Will that change anything for the Stewart campaign and at all?
No, look, I'm going to need everybody's support to knock Tim Kaine off of his pedestal. That we're going to have. I'm going to have the support of Fredis and E.W. Jackson and everybody else for that matter. I'll win the nomination. The last thing I want to do is beat up on these candidates in anticipation of I've got a brand out there. I've got a big base. Not that I'm taking for granted. I take nothing for granted. I'm a very aggressive campaigner, but it's the last thing I'm going to do is start changing the focus and attacking other Republicans here. What I'm going to be doing this time around is maintaining a focus on Tim Kaine.
You see yourself just charging ahead, running your campaign against Tim Kaine, regardless of who gets in the race.
Nobody knows who those candidates are, and I'm not going to help them. I'm not going to help their name recognition by attacking them. That's one thing. But the second thing is that I'll win the nomination, and I don't want any bad blood out there. I don't want either one of those candidates, either Fredis or E.W. Jackson. I don't want them out there and their supporters, all angry afterward that I attacked their guy. So that's not going to happen.
All right, that makes sense to me. Look, we've got you as the favorite, no question about it. You do have the name ID, and you came with percent of knocking off Ed Gillespie for the Republican nomination. So you go into this thing as the overwhelming favorite, no question about it. Look, to learn more, you can go to CoreyStewart.com. That's CoreyStewart.com. Corey, I've got about 30 seconds. I'm going to give you the final word. Go ahead.
Well, thanks a lot. We've got to focus on Tim Kaine. We need a candidate for the United States Senate who's going to embrace the president, support his agenda, and that is how we're going to get the Republican base out. We didn't get the base out last November. We can do it. I've been able to win 4 times countywide. The only Republican who's been able to do it up here in Northern Virginia. I represent almost 500,000 people. If you want a winner, if you want somebody who's going to support the president, somebody who's going to fight, then vote for me.
All right, we're out of time. I want to thank Corey Stewart for being with us. More information, go to CoreyStewart.com.